All right, let's kick things off. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, and welcome to our product clinic. My name is John Zucker, and I run our VUE community, and I'm very excited to have Ron Howard with us, who will be going through some of the prerequisites and installation considerations, etc., related to our GigaVUE Cloud Suite for VMware. Ron is one of our technical success managers and also a cloud expert who works in our professional services team. Welcome, Ron.
Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yep, looks great.
Thank you very much. So today we're going to walk through the requirements and the deployment methodology there to deploy our Cloud Suite solution inside vCenter, specifically on ES6i host. We're going to cover the prerequisites, some of the common pitfalls. We will actually go through a deployment solution and follow it up by Q&A at the end. The first and foremost is with our solution is that you need to ensure that you need to match up your vCenter version along with your ES6i host with the version that you're going to deploy. If you have an older version, for example, of the 6.7 out there, we only supported up to version 5.13. Something to take into consideration when you're going through your deployment. The next thing to take into consideration is also what size footprint do we need to deploy inside of your ES6i environment. As you see here, we offer 3 different virtual plant sizes: small, medium, large. The small, I would recommend there if you're going to deploy just a sample environment. It's just basic POC with a couple of nodes, as well as limited traffic. Once you get greater than 1 gigabit, or you're going to be using any of the GigaSmart applications that are available, I would definitely go to a medium. If you're going to be using some of the advanced GigaSmart applications, such as application intelligence or gathering the application metadata, excuse me, you want to go to a large instance at that point. When we deploy the virtual appliance, which we call vSeries node or VSN, it's deployed with 10 NICs, virtual NICs. We utilize ETH0 for management and ETH1 for the tunnel, and the other 8 NICs will be associated with your different switches, whether they're VSSs, your standard switches, or a distributed switch. Additionally, we also support multiple VSN deployments within your environment in case you have greater than 8 virtual switches associated to an ES6i host. That's just one example. Here are the basic requirements. I have it broken down here, and this is also listed within our publicly facing documentation that specifies the specific requirement or privilege and the associated function. This way, you're not having to use a admin credential or high elevated. You can customize it based upon the deployment modality which you're using. If you're going to be using the Fabric Manager to handle the orchestration of the deployment, you will need the majority of these elements or privileges to be able to deploy the solution properly. For example, if you don't have any virtual switches, for example, standard switches, you can remove a couple of the instances in here that are associated to VSS staffing. The next thing to take into consideration is opening up the required ports and protocols that you have within your environment. Each port has a different function. They're not all used at one time. And I'll be going over these in just a second. And then also we have the requirements for the vSeries node for its proper communication within the environment. And again, all this information is readily available in our publicly facing documentation. And if you have specific questions on some of the requirements, you're always welcome to contact our customer support, or we have our professional services available to help you with the deployment, where we'll walk you through step by step. So let's go through ahead and take a look at the environment. What you're seeing here is just a typical clustered environment where we have a Fabric Manager already deployed, which is located in the upper left-hand corner. Of course, we have you, right, as the user. Then we have our deployed workloads within each ES6i host, which is associated to a cluster in the environment. I also have a security tool already deployed there within the cluster environment. And also I have tools that are located on my on-prem data center that I want to send traffic to. So what are the steps? So the first thing is that I need to communicate via 443 to Fabric Manager to go ahead and initiate the conversation. The next step that's required is for me to go ahead and create my privileges as well as open the ports within my environment so that REST API calls can be exchanged between Fabric Manager and vCenter. Once that has been done, what happens in the second step is I will create a monitoring domain, which will then exchange the API calls using 443 to actually deploy the vSeries node. Each vSeries node is deployed and pinned to a specific ES6i host so that vMotion does not take into place. As I mentioned earlier, we have two vNICs associated with the management and traffic flows within the vSeries node. But then if you notice, I have 8 NICs that represent the ability to communicate with 8 different distributed switching functions within your environment. So that at that point, I'm now switching over and FM is now communicating on port 8889 between Fabric Manager and the vSeries node. Health is actually passing on port 8889 back to the FM. That's why you see the arrow pointing both directions. Additionally, we're also going to use port 5671 for basic vSeries stats. And we'll be touching on that in a little bit when I go into the deployment method. The next step here is we're actually going to create a monitoring session where we're actually going to initiate port mirroring or remote span, depending upon the type of connections that you have in your environment. The great thing is that you have the ability to have a mixed switched environment. We support both as long as it doesn't exceed 8 vNICs or 8 switches. At that point, if you have greater than 8, for example, associated to an ES6i host, you would need to deploy an additional VSN in that environment to handle the additional traffic flow. So now what's happening is we're capturing that copy traffic from each of the workloads that you have on each host, and it's being passed to the vSeries node. We then will go ahead and create the session to where we're going to tell it to where we want it to go. And it's going to use a tunnel, and it will either be a VXLAN tunnel or an L2GRE. At that point, we're able to pass the traffic there to the required tools, and I'm able to then use my tools to see my east-west traffic. Additionally, things to take into consideration is, well, what's the overhead, for example? The management traffic is really light. It's in kilobits. As if you notice, I have the management line static here because once we have sent the commands to the vSeries nodes on what its function is within your environment, there's nothing else happening except for the keep alives between the vSeries node and the FM on port 8889. Now, the higher traffic would be the actual egress traffic from your copied traffic to your designated endpoint. The only thing, we are agnostic on where you send it. All we need is a routable IP address to send the traffic to. And that's something to take into consideration when we are working with you on designing your solution is, what is my throughput? how am I egressing my traffic to my tool? We need to take that into consideration so that we're not oversubscribing your environment. So this leads us also into what are some of the other hurdles that we might face during an deployment. Do you have firewalls in place inside of your environment to where they're within your ES6i environment? Prime example, a Palo Alto firewall may be designed to where if it sees a duplicate traffic, it's going to drop any duplicate traffic. So we need to either open those ports, create exclusion rules, or bypass the firewall with your encapsulated traffic. Do I have all the proper ports and protocols open within my environment to allow all the traffic? Again, you can reference the documentation to ensure that you have that traffic flowing properly. Have I given myself the proper privileges for the environment? And finally, did I choose the appropriate size node when I did my deployment? It's not a good idea to choose a small workload or virtual appliance if I have 10 gigabits worth of traffic flowing through. And I'm also utilizing some of the GigaSmart applications that would overburden that V-series node or that virtual appliance to where it would cause it to fail and you would see a drop traffic load. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like inside of my environment. Can you see the Fabric Manager okay?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. So the first thing, of course, we want to do is me being the user, if you remember step one, is for me to go ahead and sign into the Fabric Manager, which is going to be the orchestrated environment. I'm logging in with just basic admin credentials here. That's sidebar node. If you have a FN that's already deployed in your environment where you have different permission sets, you need to make sure that whoever is doing the deployment has the appropriate permissions to be able to actually go forth and conquer. So what are some of the things that I need to do? So if I click on the inventory icon, which is going to be your 3 pizza boxes or the server nodes, I would go down to virtual, then VMware vCenter. In this model here, I'm using version 6.8, which is our latest version that's out right now. We are having 6.9 coming out at the end of this month. As you can see here, I already have a monitoring domain deployed. The reason why is I wanted you to see what it looks like as far as it being successful. Then I will go through some of the basic steps so that you can see the process for successful deployment. So before I can go forward and conquer, but I do already have everything opened up and I have a service account created, I need to go ahead and upload an image. So where I would go to do that is I'll go and click on settings, go to OVA files. You see here I have the image already uploaded, but where do I get this? Great question. So I would go to the Gigamon Community. I'll go ahead and log in. And again, if you do not have the appropriate permissions to log in. So what I did is I went here to software and release. And then I've created a filter where I wanted to look at the latest version. It's always recommended to choose the vSeries node at the same version as your Fabric Manager. If I have a version that's N-2 or greater, I'm already deployed, it is highly recommended to go and upgrade to the latest version. So then I've also chose a filter there of Cloud Suite, but still I've got way too much stuff up here, right? So what I can do is I can simplify it by going and type in vSeries. I swear, folks, he does know how to spell. And then I just need to find the OVA file. I go ahead and check the box down here to download, agree to the download. And then the file will begin to download. Once that's done, I will then upload it to where it click browse, find the location where I want to upload it to, click open, and then deploy at that point. I've had people in the past where it's a little different if you have the FM version or if you have the image file for our physical appliances, because there is an image location here. But you notice that the image file for vSeries Node is not located here. It is actually located under the image files that are associated there for vSeries. I think I've beaten that one up pretty good. What do you think? So once I have it deployed, I go to virtual VMware. And again, I'm just showing you what it looks like when it's fully deployed. As you see here, and the great thing is that I have the ability now to actually see, am I seeing traffic for the whole thing? And what's great is I can go ahead and click on different elements within my deployment to actually see how well I'm sending traffic. And I can actually get at a granular level of what my traffic looks like. And what you're seeing here are the different applications that I used in this demo environment. Down below here are the tools that I'm sending the traffic to. So these are good ways that I can use to verify if traffic's being sent. Looks like that one's not sending properly, but again, that's the great thing about the live demo is you don't know what's going to happen. There we go. It just didn't like me checking both of them at the same time. To actually see what it looks like as far as the process, and we don't worry, we will be going over this. This is an example of how complex you can get it. What you're seeing here is the basic map that's created. Along with the rule sets, setting basic IPv4. And I'm doing application visualization. I'm also capturing the metadata, which I'm sitting there to an ELK tool. In this situation, if you recall, I mentioned earlier about what size of vSeries node do I want to deploy. In this instance, we're using the heavier duty applications. We definitely would want to go with a large. Different applications, depending upon the license that you have, are located here on the left, where I can actually go ahead and do dedupe. I can do header stripping. I can load balance my traffic, slice it, mask it if there's certain critical information I need to keep from the tool set. So I have the ability to get at a very granular level on how I want to send the traffic. I can even get to the point where, for example, I can set it to where I only look at the east-west traffic. I can use the unique MAC identifier for VMware, which is 005056, as my prefix, where I only look at any type of communication that's between two different VMs that lie within my ES6i environment. The only caveat to that is that as long as I don't change the MAC address of the VM, I will filter out all other traffic except for any communications that's on that plane. Another place that I can go and see what's going on is I can go to the dashboard and I can go to the analytics dashboard. And what's great about this is I can see what's the health of my inventory? Do I have anything that's red? And the great thing is if something was red, it would actually show up and I would be able to filter on the node that's actually unhealthy to be able to reach out to support or my professional service engineer to gain some assistance on getting that resolved. Additionally, I can look at different statistical information on the traffic flow of the environment. And this is one reason why I wanted to show you this first before I went to the deployment, is so that we can actually see some metrics before we do the deployment. And I can also change the variables based upon different times. to really get an idea of what my traffic's doing. It's like, well, what is my usage, for example? Like, not a problem. I can go here, choose the license that I have, and then it'll show me exactly how much traffic I've accumulated based upon certain criteria that I have, and let me know, am I overexceeding? Am I underutilizing the traffic? I have all those capabilities. Additionally, I can take a look at my environment. Am I connected to vCenter? If you recall, there is a consistent exchanging of REST API calls between Fabric Manager and vCenter. If this is disconnected, I have the ability to go back in there and reconnect it. So let's say I'm on a cycle to where I have to change the password every 90 days. Not a problem. I can go ahead and here check the box, go to Actions, go to Edit, and then I can go to Update vCenter password. And then at that point, I can go ahead and put in the new password. Or if I need to change the username, I can do that from here as well. Also, I can click on the vSeries node, and it will give me the information that I have deployed. For example, which data center am I using to actually host the files? What is the IP address of my vSeries node for management? What is the IP address there for my tunnel? All that information is readily available, and it shows me. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is we support both types of deployments, both DHCP as well as a static deployment. So let's go ahead and simulate a deployment. One of the great things, since 6.8 supports multiple vSeries nodes, I can still leave the same one engaged and simulate the actual process of deploying it. So here I'm going to go check the boxes, click Actions, deploy Fabric. Go ahead and choose the data center that I'm in, what cluster set that I want to capture, do the drop down on the image. And the great thing is that if you notice here on the right-hand side that if I accidentally upload the OVA file to the wrong location, not a problem. I can click Add here and go ahead and upload. One thing to take into consideration, if you're connected via VPN and you have a slow connection, my recommendation would be to upload the OVA file to a jump host to ensure that you don't time out on the deployment. So here at this point, I should go ahead and choose my version. Say I want to deploy a medium. I have two options here. Is I can actually import host from a file. What this is this will actually allow me to download a CSV file, which will have a listing of all of the files that I already have. I'm sorry, I don't have Excel in here, but I can open this up in Excel, and then I can populate the information and then do an automated deployment, which would be the same as me going through and adding the host manually. Go ahead and say I want to select all the hosts. Then next step I'll have is a common configuration section to where I will need to choose, do I have a data store, or am I using a data store cluster for the hosts that are deployed? Then I have the ability of predefining the prefix for the different nodes that I'm going to deploy. Do I have a specific naming convention that I need to use for my environment? I can go ahead and preset those values to where that will be pre-populated to all the different nodes that I'm deploying during this engagement. And I can either use a prefix or a suffix, or I can go in there and custom set it. Not a problem on how I want to do it. I have the ability, if I need to have a secure connection there to the vSeries node, if I have to lock down the vSeries node to troubleshoot it, I can add a certificate to the vSeries node to allow a stronger level of encryption. Then I can also define how many nodes am I going to deploy. Again, if you recall, what does my traffic look like? Do I have overabundance? Do I need to account for that? Am I going to be using some of the advanced features? This is where I would choose it. But if I have a base environment, I would typically go and choose one. But again, I can always go back and modify that. Next thing is I would need to go ahead and identify what is my management work group that I'm going to use. Then I'll go ahead and choose, am I using DHCP or static? MTU is not a required variable, but you can go ahead and populate. By default, it chooses 1500. But if I'm using jumbo frames or if I have a mixed value, I can set that value there. Then I'll go ahead and choose the network. If you notice here, I'm choosing two different port groups for the management and the tunnel. And the reason behind that, as a lot of you probably already know, is that Linux has a unique values that it would choose the path of least resistance, so that if I have both management and the tunnel on the same subnet, that there is a possibility that I could crisscross my traffic and then bring down my network because it will lose communication with the appropriate path. Next, I choose thin provision is usually a default standard. I can set a deployment folder to where I can keep it isolated. Say if I want to call it Gigamon. Next part is what's the password that I'm going to use to log into the vSeries node at a later date if I need to troubleshoot. So that's user defined. It's recommended to go ahead and to ensure that you save that, because if you lose the password, you will have to redeploy it. Once I have my common configuration configured, go ahead and choose apply all. Then at this point, I can go down to the actual vSeries node that I'm going to deploy, and I can expand it out a little more by clicking on the carets, and I can change the variables to be unique for each one. As you can see here, each vSeries node has its own data store. So I need to choose the data store associated with that environment. And let's say if I, for example, if I wanted to change the name of the vSeries node because I don't like it, I can call save my name here. Here. And then once I've done doing all the deployment, I just simply click deploy. Then I can actually go into my vCenter and watch the deployment of the nodes that I just configured. Once everything is configured and you have the nice healthy check marks here, I will then go into the monitoring session. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete our current monitoring session and go through the actual process. Actions. I'm going to delete this. As you see here, it's actually undeploying. And what's happening, if you recall, back on my previous slide there on port 8889, I'm actually sending information out on that port to go to the vSeries nodes to tell it to remove the configuration element there within its matrix. Now it's gone. So next I would click new as if it's a new one. We click monitoring session. What's my alias going to be? Think of telling a story. When I used to manage large scale environments, I always took things into consideration that I'm not going to be one that's going to be managing this until the end of time. And I want to be able to provide a story, so to speak, to whoever is going to take over so they can understand what I'm doing here. So for example, this is my VMware demo, or I could call it company name - Windows, for example, or Linux. Next here, I'm going to choose monitoring domain. that I defined. What is my connection? Demo connection. Go ahead and click next. As you notice here, I have a blank canvas. This is where it gets really difficult. You ready? So I drag a new map onto the screen. It doesn't like me. Wasn't that neat? Interesting. At this point, what I would do is call support desk and say, hey, why isn't my screen? Hey, there we go. Look, it finally copied on there. I have a feeling that it's my new computer that I have up here, and there is a disconnect on the communication since I am going through a jump host to create this communication. I've seen some of my customers that are on the call, and you know that I know how to do this. I promise. Come on. There we go. So here I want to give it the alias name, map. So I want to call it demo map. And say anything. Rule sets. Let's say, for example, I have Gigamon taps on the physical environment, and I don't need to see communication on the physical plane. I only want to see communication between the two environments. So what I will do is I'll go and choose by MAC. Go ahead and choose MAC destination. Oops. Might help if you click the plus sign there. So then I would choose oops, that's 56, 0, colon, 0, colon, 0. Now here, this one, I'm going to do the FF, colon, FF, colon, FF, colon, so that I don't have to fat finger this all over again. I am going to cheat. Take the same elements, put it down here on the other condition. Yep. Doesn't like me doing it through a jump host, does it? Go and click save. Let's say that I wanted to get rid of some duplication. We'll see if it will let me. Yes, it did. Yes. So now that I have my elements on here, I have my basic map, I have the application that I want to use, and my final destination. So at this point, I click on the left dot. Drag. On the other red dot. Oops. Come on. Now that I have my pathways going, so what I'm doing is I have my map going to duplication. Then I'm sending it to my final destination. Go ahead and click the deploy. The information is then being sent via port 8889 to the vSeries node. As you see here, I now have two of two nodes healthy. I can even go into my topology, choose my monitoring domain that I have deployed. And I can now see my environment at a granular level and see everything that's deployed. The great thing too is that if there was, say, for example, I didn't want this node here, I could actually get this Linux box. I could go in and create an exclusion rule for 1061, 118.49 to where I exclude that node, and it will show up here gray. But since we're almost out of time, I'm going to leave the last couple of minutes to open the floor up for questions.
Very good. That sounds great. Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left. So there's a few questions that have come in. The first one is around operating systems. What's the operating system for what are the operating systems for Fabric Manager and vSeries? What are they built on?
Great question. So we previously were built up on CentOS version 7, but as we know that CentOS has been deprecated by the Linux community. Starting with version 6.5, we moved over to Rocky Linux for the nodes.
All right. The next question, can I send multiple sources down the same tunnel?
Can I send traffic down multiple sources down the same tunnel? So yes. So if I have, for example, different monitoring domains and I needed to go to different tool sets, I have the ability through the maps to isolate specific traffic and then route that to the defined tool. Let's say that tool A needs to see everything, but tool B and C only needs to see a subset of that traffic and only a defined value. So I can go in there and create map rules to where I isolate those key pathways, and then I send that only to the tool so that those defined tools only get what it's required.
Right. Let's see. Last question that came in. Can I create custom sizes for each virtual appliance in a monitoring domain?
Great question. So the answer to that is within one monitoring domain, they all have to be the same size. If I am wanting custom size instances deployed in my environment, because I know, for example, node D is going to have very light traffic, what I would want to do is create a monitoring domain only for that node or those defined nodes where I have limited traffic. Then I can go ahead and use a smaller instance size.
Good. With that, I'd like to again thank everyone for attending this session. I'd like to also thank you, Ron, for another great deep dive demonstration and an overview of our vSeries products. Thank you, Ron. And with that, we'll go ahead and close things up. Everybody have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, and we look forward to seeing you in a future product clinic. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day, evening, etc.